Welcome back to Truth to Tell, Community Connections. I'm Michelle Ali-Murati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. Welcome to the 9th in our series, Truth to Tell, Community Connections. These are forums held across the state of Minnesota on location, thanks to generous funding from the Bush Foundation and production services powered by St. Paul Neighborhood Network and KFAI Radio, Fresh Air Community Radio.
We're live here from the Minneapolis Urban League to talk about stabilizing communities after the housing crisis. We've partnered with Jewish Community Action, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs Housing Forum at the Humphrey Institute, Occupy Homes Minnesota, the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, and the Northside Community Reinvestment Coalition, and the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless, and of course our production partners, like we said, SPNN and KFAI Fresh Air Radio. Quite
the coalition indeed. Here tonight to talk about the current state of affordable housing here in the Twin Cities Metro, in the aftermath of the still persistent foreclosure crisis, and especially in the face of rising home values and dropping interest rates. Why? We should be asking, is the foreclosure machinery still grinding away at depression levels and so often mercilessly focused in low-income neighborhoods?
Mainstream news headlines point to subtly reassuring indicators that the economy is improving, the housing market included, yet we still see record rates of home foreclosures compared to anything we ever saw in years prior to the crisis that started to take shape in 2007.
Now, we're here today to not only talk about what happens to homeowners who are facing or have faced fallen victim to a home foreclosure, but also the ripple effects that these mass home foreclosures have caused. Most are negative, but some are actually a bit encouraging. Why would that be? Well, we'll hear about what our panelists are doing in just a moment, but first we'd like to play a short video to give you an introduction to tonight's conversation.
This month on Truth to Tell Community Connections, we look at the still ever-present issue of foreclosures in the community. They're still happening all over the metro area. We'll talk to some homeowners that are dealing with this firsthand, some activists that are dealing with the ripple effects of foreclosure, as well as helping some of these homeowners to try to stay in their homes. And we'll talk to the experts about what policies are being passed and what policies still need to be made to keep this from happening in the future. That's this month on Truth to Tell Community Connections.
We need to make sure that we have stable homes so we have a stable community, so families, young kids, mothers, fathers, grandparents have a place to call their own and lay their head down.
Just having a stable place to live is really necessary.
The number of foreclosures in 2013 is still substantially higher than the number that used to happen each year prior to the bubble burst.
I've been in my home here for 30 years. I bought it with my late husband. We bought it for $74,900. And in the 30 years that I've been here, I've already paid $425,000.
There are a huge number of reasons why people face foreclosure. For a while in the early stages of the crisis, it was a lot about predatory lending.
That is wrong, because then you don't see it.
And now what does that mean?
Well, it means they could evict me within 24 hours.
Deceit rang my phone over and over, called by name, claimed to be working with me, at the same time sold my home right out from under me.
I actually got into trouble after my husband died with a predatory lender.
A lot of people have been victims of predatory loans, have been put into positions where they paid for their houses many times over and yet are still being put out by the big banks.
I ended up, at the time of my foreclosure, I was paying almost $2,200 a month. So it was not sustainable.
Dual tracking simply means that the bank owns the mortgage, but the servicing of the mortgage is done by a separate company. And what's happened is sometimes a person will get behind in their payments, and the bank has the ability to do a loan modification, but the servicer is the one that actually does the foreclosure.
Keith Ellison, I contacted him about contacting Freddie Mac to have them deal with me. And he was told that I'm currently in court with them, that I chose to go to court. Now, they tried to evict me. I had to go to eviction court. It wasn't my choice because they were dual tracking me, because it appeared Chase was still trying to work with me.
I leaned in, I whispered, I believe this is my home.
Jewish Community Action came together with a bunch of organizations to start the Northside Community Reinvestment Coalitions. People from different communities were partnering, and they were literally just going out to streets that had a lot of vacant housing, knocking on doors, and lo and behold, a lot of the people we knocked on said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm facing foreclosure.
We know that the housing crisis has caused untold harm in our neighborhoods.
Occupy Homes is the only organization that came to me and asked me if I wanted to save my home rather than lose it.
I started staying in vacants this previous March. I officially moved into one in May, and I've been staying in reclaimed vacant houses, working to renovate the homes and use them to put pressure on these banks to donate these buildings to the community for community-controlled affordable housing.
When they were scheduled to evict me on my daughter's birthday, October 8th, 150 community members showed up and formed a blockade around my house. And the sheriffs weren't able to evict me. These are cement barrels. They probably weigh a ton. There is a little bar across it where you can lock into that. And this tactic is actually to delay the sheriff so that more people could get here for the barricade.
We believe that housing is a human right. It even says so in the UN Charter.
It makes absolutely no sense why any bank would not want to do a modification, because at the end of the day, they don't want to own the homes outright. Better for the family too, better for the community.
I'm asking for a just mortgage at current market value.
Principal reduction means if I bought a home 6-7 years ago and it was worth $200,000, the housing bubble burst, now the home is worth $80,000. Principal reduction says, let me pay my mortgage based on the $80,000 worth of the house.
They can't reap all their, all the penalties that they're getting off of a small homeowner like me.
We also know that there needs to be something done about what the community knows about the banks, how they know what kind of behavior banks are doing. And so we worked with Elizabeth Glidden, John Quincy, and other members of the City Council to recently pass the Responsible Banking Ordinance. It's going to say to the banks, if you want to become a depository for city taxpayer money, you are going to have to provide a set of data, loan modifications, number of foreclosures, so that the public has a better understanding of the performance of a bank in the community.
We're going to shift the way we think about what government looks at when we make decisions about who our vendors are.
We think what responsible banking can do is begin the process of making communities healthier by increasing the investment in those communities by banks.
Foreclosure just doesn't affect some, it affects all. It could be your neighbor, your brother, your mother, you.
And just knowing that you have a steady place to go home to, where you can make yourself a meal and lie down in your own bed is an amazing feeling that I think a lot of people really take for granted.
It's still a significant problem, and it still needs a lot of people and resources to deal with it.
I love my neighbors. I love the community. I don't want to move.
Thank you to John Aker and Beth Piloff for helping us shoot and edit that video. It's great.
They're here tonight.
They
as a
are
matter
here
of fact.
tonight.
Mhm.
Put them on the spot. We introduced a range of topics in this video that our panelists can speak to, and hopefully you will too. We're going to give you a brief introduction to our panelists who were not featured in our video, and then we will get right to the participatory part of today's forum. And during that time, we'd like to hear from a few other organizers, researchers, and the like that are here in the audience tonight about what you're doing in the community as well.
Vic Rosenthal spoke in our video, and he's here tonight. Thank heaven. Vic is the executive director of Jewish Community Action. JCA has been working on affordable housing for more than a decade or more now, right? In any event, welcome back to Truth to Tell, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to be here, Andy.
And also seen in our video is the lovely Jamie Kelly. She's here with us tonight. Jamie is a homeowner currently fending off foreclosure or eviction from foreclosure in her home in South Minneapolis. She's working with Occupy Homes Minnesota to fend off this eviction, and you've fended it off at least 2 times now, right, Jamie?
Yes.
And so you're still continuing that fight. And you were also a recent Minneapolis mayoral candidate,
Yes, I was.
running under the issue of Stop Foreclosures Now.
Right.
How do you do that for an election season and still try to fend off foreclosure? That's how I'd like to know. We'll get that story in a minute.
Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
Anthony Newby is Executive Director of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change. Some people call it KNOCK. Knock on your door. A member-led grassroots organization fighting for racial justice and economic justice, and particularly active right now in the fight to stop the foreclosure crisis. We're hoping Anthony can tell us tonight, and every night, why some mortgage companies continue to swindle homeowners when they have no interest, as Vic was saying in the video, in owning the properties they're wrenching away from them. Well, we'll hear more about that in just a minute, and welcome to you, Anthony.
Good to be here.
And finally, we also have with us Ed Getz, returning to Truth to Tell. Ed is a director of CURA, the CURA Housing Forum, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs Housing Forum at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And he was also Andy's teacher for a while, right?
Yep.
And,
He was indeed.
and Ed is here tonight to answer questions about the current state of affordable housing in the wake of this crisis. And we also hope to hear about some of your ideas for solutions. Ed, I hope you came ready with those.
Great, thank you.
He just threw away all his notes. What is that
Sorry.
about?
Welcome. Glad to have you here tonight. So what I'd like to do is start with you here tonight, Anthony, if we can, put you on the spot. We've been really connected with this foreclosure issue for a while, and you've worked a lot with the Cruz family over a year ago, right?
That's right.
And so that's a particular case that was really exemplifying what we're talking about here, the banks seeming to not act in their own interest, because in this particular case, the Cruz family didn't even neglect to pay their mortgage. Their payment wasn't processed due to some sort of computer error or something like that. And rather than the bank helping them sort this all out, they demanded, that they vacate the home, and they tried to expedite the foreclosure process. And what we want to know is, why is that? We hear about this so often, that banks don't want to work with people, and we heard a little bit in the video about this dual tracking issue, but is there some other reason why the banks are, demanding these exorbitant amounts of money from people, but then turning around and selling these houses off at what appears to be a loss? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that?
We've spent the last couple of years trying to unravel exactly that. And I think there's many answers to that question. In the case of the Cruz home, this was a family in South Minneapolis that was at the end of the redemption period, meaning the family had run out of legal recourse to save the home.
And that's that 6-month period after you've received notice of foreclosure and before the sheriff's sale actually takes place.
That's
Is
exactly
that
right.
All
You can get jargony really quickly, but in Minnesota, it's roughly a 12-month process. At the midway point is a sheriff's sale, followed by a 6-month redemption period.
Oh, there's a redemption period. Sorry.
And so this particular family was at the end of that redemption period, had little to no recourse to save their home. And one of the things we found out was at this midway point, at this sheriff's sale where that home goes up for auction in the public market, in the public sphere, and anybody can bid on it. After that sheriff's sale, it becomes increasingly difficult to negotiate with the banks. And it took us a while to figure out why is that? Why would this arbitrary line in the sand be drawn where banks just sort of stop returning phone calls? The line is, it's beyond our control at this point. There's nothing really we can do.
And who sets that line and why?
Well, oftentimes it's because when that home goes up for public sale, there's now a new owner, Anybody can bid on it. It's further complicated by the fact that that new owner is oftentimes another bank who buys it at a negotiated price. So banks are selling to other banks, and they're negotiating and modifying with another bank. They won't do it with the homeowner, but they will do it with another bank.
They'll negotiate with another bank, but not the homeowner. That's cute.
So,
all right.
So that's part of the issue. Another part of the issue, and this was particularly true with the Cruz family, their loan was backed by Freddie Mac, which is a quasi-governmental agency that insures loans.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they're two separate agencies under one umbrella organization, FHFA. But Freddie Mac in particular in this case said that they would not negotiate. Their core policy is that they don't issue principal reduction, and after the sheriff's sale, it's next to impossible to get Freddie Mac to budge and negotiate any sort of deal with the homeowner or the lender. So there's both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac who are involved with the ownership, and the lender and the servicer. There's sometimes a trustee involved.
But do we know why? I mean, in this particular case, we had the Cruz family on our show, was about a year
Which
and a
was
half
one
ago
of the
now.
first, stand firm, stop foreclosure kinds of actions, I think, by Occupy Homes at the time.
Well,
or at least
definitely one of the higher profile ones.
Yeah,
It was a national
Rose
profile.
McGee.
Yeah.
Rose McGee was one, and I think, okay.
So at the point when they found out that there was some mistake with the processing of their payment, I mean, why wouldn't the bank have wanted to work with them right away at that point when they were still willing to continue to pay their mortgage?
It's a great question, and what we found out by going to PNC Bank, which was the servicer of the loan, and running up this set of demands up the flagpole from a basic call center to a manager to eventually up to the president of the bank, was they had a commitment to work with the family, but was told by Freddie Mac, who actually insured and backed the loan, that they could not and would not negotiate with the family. And in fact, if PNC Mortgage negotiated with the family, it would be a violation of their contractual agreements. And there was an implied, if not an implicit, threat that Fannie Mae would not insure any more loans from PNC Bank if they negotiated with the family.
One of these things we know now is it not true? And let's start talking with others here too as well. But you can also jump in, Anthony. Is that we know that many of these mortgages, that although written by a single mortgage holder or a mortgage company, were sold off for servicing by other companies, and then they were also divided up in the investment world into mortgage-backed securities, and then they were spread all over the place, weren't they, Ed? And to that extent, is that sort of something that solidified this policy of never negotiating on the principal, because they really wouldn't even have known how to lose that kind of money?
Right. The securitization of these mortgage debts is one of the most important factors in this phenomenon over the past 5 to 10 years. Because the old system whereby the bank was connected to the homeowner by holding the mortgage and servicing the mortgage has been broken, and so there's no connection, especially when the mortgage debt can actually be fractured and split into many different security instruments, and so it's really becomes very difficult to trace ultimate ownership of these properties and to get to. I commend Anthony on actually getting to the bank that was responsible in this one case, because that can be really very difficult in these instances.
Yeah, did PNC actually govern the whole process with all these investments going in other places?
Well, so it's a good question. I think the short answer is no. Okay. They bundled and packaged securities. They would issue them and then send them on their way almost as soon as they issued them to other investors. In the case of the Cruz family, they actually bought that loan from another investor, another bank that had issued loans, a bank that was notorious for issuing predatory loans. PNC bought a bunch of predatory loans, essentially, of which the Cruz family loan was one. So they inherited a loan in this case. And it was tremendously difficult to get to them. In fact, to get to them, we actually had to drive to Pittsburgh. The family actually
is that right?
got in a van.
All right.
After getting verbal commitments from the vice president of the bank. The family got in a van and drove to PNC headquarters in Pittsburgh, had to take an elevator up with security escorting them up to speak to some very high-level executives to get very simple answers about, can you negotiate our loan? We have, they actually brought an envelope full of money or full of checks to pay their mortgage and documents proving that they owned it. And the short answer was, we actually can't do anything. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are making the decision.
And they had no foundation to sue them for the fact that there was a problem with the computer or their payment system.
I mean, in their case, one of the problems that has since been sort of rectified by a homeowner bill of rights that NOC, Occupy Homes, JCA, and some others helped to pass a bill at the legislature last session that allows for at least another layer of protection for homeowners to be able to sue. In the case of the Cruz family home and the timing, they actually had no legal recourse whatsoever. So they believed that, and there was some evidence that their payment was rejected, an online payment was not processed properly by the bank, which happens. We all have can think in our own lives of examples where that happens.
And they started talking about losing documents here and there too, didn't they? I mean, they started saying, well, we just don't have these documents around anymore. We can't seem to locate.
Well, and there wasn't any sort of clause about people like that being able to be grandfathered in under this homeowners bill of rights?
No, there's actually a start date, and it's not retroactive. It's unfortunate. There's hundreds of thousands of families, literally, just in Minnesota. And the facts are, the people that have already lost them, we don't know the circumstances oftentimes of their foreclosure. How much was the bank complicit in losing paperwork, in outright fraud in many, many cases? It's very difficult to trace, and there was a culture in the last 5 to 10 years of shame, where the public narrative was it's somehow individuals' faults for taking on too much debt or being irresponsible, and maybe they did lose the paperwork. That I think Occupy Homes and others have really helped to change that public narrative. But the really sad part is the massive numbers of folks who have lost their home with no legal recourse whatsoever.
And the fact that, making even just the smallest mistake should lead to you being kicked out on the street. And so these are the ripple effects that we're talking about. So, we're learning from situations like the Cruz family, and also, what we've heard about Jamie's situation too, is things are coming out of that that can actually be positive, like the passing of the homeowners bill of rights. I mean, now we've got these protections in place, and that's what we want to continue to talk about when we come back from our break, is just these ripple effects. Most aren't great, but there are some positive effects that are including new policies, strategic organizing, and new coalitions and other things that we're hearing about from our panelists and our guests here today on the 9th of our Truth to Tell Community Connections series, brought to you by Civic Media Minnesota, St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and KFAI Fresh Air Radio, with generous funding from the Bush Foundation.
And we're speaking with Vic Rosenthal, whom I want to get into this legislation which was passed when we get back from break.
The responsible banking.
The responsible banking legislation that he helped pass last session. And he's executive director of the Jewish Communities Action Organization. Jamie Kelly is a South Minneapolis resident. And recent mayoral candidate who's currently in the throes of a foreclosure action. And by the way, do want to get your full story out a little bit later too, Jamie. A South Minneapolis resident she is, and still sitting there in her house. This is great. Anthony Newby, you've been hearing from, executive director of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change. And Ed Getz down here at the far end, tail end, trickling off the edge of the table here, director of the Center for Urban Regional Affairs, and he heads up the housing forum at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs, which is the new name, by the way. rather the Humphrey Institute, which sounds so formal. In any event.
So we're going to take a 2-minute break here. Stick around, and we'll be right back here on Truth to Tell Community Connections.
You are watching Truth to Tell's Community Connections series.
Welcome back to Truth to Tell Community Connections. I'm Michelle Ali-Marati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll, and we're getting back to the ripple effects of foreclosure and how we stabilize communities and affordable housing of all types after this devastating wave of foreclosures that's been happening since 2007.
During this part of our show, we're going to bring in questions and comments from our audience members here tonight. And so we'll have Siobhan standing by with a microphone. She's standing in the back there. So if you have questions and comments to add, just raise your hand and Siobhan will come get you. And we'll just, for right now, pick up where we left off. We were just talking about the responsible banking ordinance that was passed in Minneapolis recently with the help of...
Was it an ordinance or a piece of legislation at the state?
Responsible banking was an ordinance, but just to pick up on something Anthony was talking about regarding the Homeowner Bill of Rights.
This is Vic Rosenthal.
The two key pieces that we got done this last session, one was an end to dual tracking. Now that had already been outlawed by some work that had been done at the federal level with a settlement with the attorneys general and as well as the major banks in the country.
And for listeners who don't know what dual tracking really is, tell us again.
Anthony was describing it with the cruise residents,
Yeah,
and it's essentially just saying that you're going to outlaw the idea that one part to the process can continue down the line of foreclosure while the other tries to negotiate a settlement. And we've seen in too many cases where someone has lost their home, it's been sold right out from under them while they were negotiating, thinking that they had a chance to save their home and they couldn't. The other key part to the Homeowner Bill of Rights, which is now, we hope, going to be tested, is the private right of action that actually will provide attorney's fees for lawyers that are able to help homeowners win and keep their homes. We think that this can provide a tremendous incentive for attorneys to be able to represent homeowners like the Cruz family, like Rose McGee, and know that when they represent homeowners and if they win and help the homeowners stay in their home, they're then actually paid for the time they've put in as an attorney. So this legislation, any legislation that gets passed, the key is it enforceable?
That's it.
Will dual tracking truly be eliminated? We don't know. What we do know is with a private right of action, if we see it again and we have an attorney ready to go, they're able to test it, and we're hoping if enough successful legal suits and challenges are done by lawyers representing families, that may be the best way to eliminate the process of dual tracking and other kinds of discrepancies that exist in terms of the way homeowners and renters are treated.
Well, and you mentioned also, I think earlier in the video, about how the responsible banking ordinance is going to require public reports from banks on a quarterly or annual basis?
Well, we don't know exactly. Responsible banking was adopted by the city of Minneapolis.
And that was Elizabeth Glidden sponsoring
Elizabeth Glidden, several others.
And others,
She and John Quincy took the lead. Several others were supporters, and it passed, virtually unanimously. We don't know exactly how it's going to work. What we do know is that for the first time, there will be information that will be collected by the city in terms of the activities of banks in the community. Loan modifications, how many foreclosures, small business lending, all kinds of different things, so we can track what banks are doing, and the community will have a better sense of whether or not banks are being good corporate citizens. It seems clear to us that if the city of Minneapolis or Hennepin County is going to deposit money in the banks should be transparent about what information they share about the work they're doing, and that the community is then able to hold banks accountable to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing in terms of investing in communities and helping for people to buy homes, keep their homes, businesses to get started, all kinds of things that are essential for communities to thrive.
And what are the excuses banks are coming up with to not participate in this change in responsibility and responsible banking processes?
Well, thus far they didn't oppose responsible banking. I guess it's a little hard to say that we don't feel like we have to share information with the city that's actually giving us their money to deposit in our banks. What we have to see is what information is shared, and then what it is that the public is able to do to make sure that we have a good idea of how that money is being spent, how it's being invested. So this is one of those, pieces of legislation at the city level where we know what we've put on the books, now we have to put it into place. One of the things that some of us are looking at is this idea of sort of ranking the banks or a bank report card to actually see what, in fact, how banks are doing in our community.
What about St. Paul?
I live in St. Paul, and
so do I.
Let's just say they haven't acted yet.
Is there anything pending, like what you had in Minneapolis?
Not pending yet, but let's just say there are conversations that have taken place.
Okay.
And they just had an election, so now it's time to descend.
Well,
is that right?
So let's talk, Vic and Ed and Anthony. I don't know.
Well, let's get a little bit of what Jamie's experiencing right now. What
I just want to know. Well, we'll hear from Jamie, I guess.
And I want to get policy from Ed.
Yeah, I want to know how these new, like the Homeowners Bill of Rights and the Responsible Banking Ordinance, how any of that would directly affect Jamie's situation. Is that going to help her out? And let's hear her story first, and then see if anything overlaps.
Yeah. Any glimmers now that you've heard about all this legislation going on, Jamie?
Well, yeah, there are some glimmers. You talk about responsible banking and getting the banks to comply with being transparent. I would also like your quasi-government agencies like Freddie Mac to also have to comply with that, because what I'm seeing is it's an unregulated organization that was founded to help homeowners and has actually become quite out of control, is what I would say. I mean, they aren't working with homeowners. It would appear that they're working against homeowners, certainly against me.
I thought they were brought up short. Excuse me, by the president and by the Congress at one point, Ed.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Well, I thought Freddie Mac was
the GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, the Freddie Mac, have gotten off pretty easily in this whole process.
Yeah,
especially in the light of the kind of stances they've taken that Anthony described on some of the mortgages that they're insuring.
So what next? He said.
What next? Before we go to what next,
before you run for office,
there's one other aspect of this that I'd like to mention at this point, and that is that we talk a lot about the impact of foreclosures on homeowners. But nationwide, it's estimated that up to 40% of the people who are forced out of their homes due to foreclosures are renters. That there's a huge impact of this crisis on renters, and
it's a huge percentage too.
And it's higher in some places than in others. I'm not exactly sure what the figures are locally, but I do know.
I think we have some people in the audience we can reference.
Who might, right?
Yeah.
But I do know that both Minneapolis and St. Paul saw a very large increase in the number of investor-owned properties in the early parts of the 2000 years. And so right prior to the foreclosure crisis unfolding here, you did see a lot of investor property. So I'm imagining that the problem is quite extensive here. And that suggests a set of additional policies that we need to think about in terms of protecting renters' rights, notification of renters, and what we do to turn around those properties as well.
Have you seen a significant impact on the planning for affordable housing, like what we're seeing from, the Met Council or anything like that? How is having all of these vacant homes affecting their future plans?
Well, now you're in his bailiwick.
Right. I just don't think that it's my sense of this is that the foreclosure crisis is sort of segmented off as an additional burden for this region, in addition to our lack of affordable housing. We had an acute lack of affordable housing going into this crisis, and
Boy, did we ever.
And this crisis has only worsened it. And so I think that in that respect, it has contributed to regional planning.
And that was metropolitan-wide. I mean, because there were policies that were supposed to, the community investment stuff that was supposed to be taking place through the Metropolitan Council in various suburbs and near ring suburbs?
That's correct. And the Metropolitan Council tends to limit itself to new development. And so when it makes recommendations or prescriptions about affordable housing, it does so in the context of what percentage of new housing should be made affordable.
And not conversions, as it were.
Not conversions, and not in any respect attempting to deal with the existing degree of lack of affordability.
And we're back to renting and ownership
owning.
as well, right?
And owning, that's correct.
So that creates a real problem. Okay. So, Anthony, where does a neighborhood organizing for change take a step or two beyond this, and then we'll get to questions from our audience?
So in a few different ways. One, we support, Jamie Kelly, the Occupy Homes movement. We work closely with those folks and try to support them when we can. They've got a very proactive stance with regards to vacant property. Right now, we know nationally there are multiple times more vacant properties than there are homeless people. So there's a real opportunity, we feel, to connect the two of those things. There's blighted communities we're in North Minneapolis now. I live in North Minneapolis. Still on nearly every block, there are one or more or multiple vacant properties that often sit for months or years.
Yeah.
And we think there's a way to connect that to people who need affordable, stable housing. So
why do the banks want these buildings? What is it? And why do they want to let them sit there vacant and unpaid for? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
That's a great question, and I think that's one of the big disconnects in this whole crisis is what's the real motivation? What we know is these big quasi-governmental agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, their sole purpose is to insure loans. And so once a loan goes into foreclosure and goes bad, Fannie Mae bails it out and pays the full price of the loan. So if you're a lender and you know that your loan is insured and you know you're going to get full market value for that loan, it decreases your incentive to be proactive and a good steward of that property.
In terms of keeping that person in the home, let alone, occupied altogether, right?
That's right. So at a certain point, the money exchanges hands, the insurance money is paid, and there's not a lot of incentive on behalf of other folks to get it rolling and moving. So
let's bring in our audience on this. I know we have some folks in the audience who are dealing with...
Excuse me, my friends out there, okay?
Some people who are working on solutions for what to do with these vacant homes.
One of the things I'd like to see from this, we have a small but rich audience here tonight, that's for sure. One of the richnesses is that there's a person from Keith Ellison's office who might be able to explain to some degree why Keith Ellison might not be in the forefront of trying to bring Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to the table and get either that or get some legislation going. And she's back there in the back corner to talk about how they can change these policies that seem to be operating directly in contravention of what so-called Main Street used to be talked about back in 2008. Would you tell us that, please? Your name, please.
First, I'm Laura Lambert, and I work in Keith Ellison's office as his housing person, along with other topics. I would say that Keith has been very active in trying to do what he can do from his position. He's been active against DeMarco, but that's a Senate decision.
Who's DeMarco?
So Edward DeMarco he's kind of the guy who runs Freddie and Fannie right now.
Both?
And
He runs both?
he runs both. And was it 1 or 2 weeks ago, the Senate confirmation came up for Mel Watt to replace Ed DeMarco. That did not pass, but Senator Harry Reid said he would bring it back again. So that's one big thing at Congress. If we can get Edward DeMarco out at the congressional level and get someone in who is interested in writing down loans, the whole field will change. So at a congressional level, it's in the Senate's hands right now, hopefully to open that door. So that's a big piece.
Do we have an understanding at all about where the money's going to come from to write down those loans? Do we know at all where oh, you can answer this question? All right.
Becky, you can. Go ahead.
Mic to Becky over here. Hi, I'm Becky Dornbeck. I'm an organizer with Occupy Homes. There have actually been a number of studies of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, including studies done by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, showing that doing principal reductions on these loans would actually save taxpayers and Fannie and Freddie a lot of money. But Ed DeMarco has decided that he doesn't care for those studies, and so they don't apply, and has just
Is that because of where the money would go instead of where the money he'd like to see go?
It's hard to know what's motivating him. He's a very stubborn individual, and we've been trying to replace him. The Senate, as Laura was saying, his vote came up in the Senate on Halloween, and the Republicans filibustered his nomination. They filibustered the nominations of several other nominees as well.
You mean Republicans are our friends in this case?
No,
they're
I'm sorry. They filibustered
getting rid of him.
They filibustered getting rid of him, and they filibustered several other nominees as well. And there has been, and the Democrats have been letting them get away with this by not using all the tools at their disposal to let these nominations go through and to let Mel Watt become approved, and to get a permanent director in there who might be able to work with people like Jamie, who might be able to work with people like the Cruz family. Because Ed DeMarco has taken a very hard line against working with anybody under any circumstances. He's actually an interim director. He was a Bush appointee appointed 4 years ago, and they haven't been able to replace him.
Really?
Yeah.
As an interim director, doesn't the administration have a huge amount of power in replacing him?
You would think so. However, the Senate has to confirm every nominee, and the Senate doesn't always like to do things.
Is there anything that can be done on the state level to try to mitigate, what's the ripple effects of having all of these vacant homes, and what that's doing for affordable housing as a whole? I mean, is there anything that we can do just here with either on the city level or on the state level without any movement from Freddie and Fannie?
Yes.
Antoine?
We have Antoine Martineau here. Hello, Antoine.
Sure. So, I'm an organizer with Occupy Homes, and I've also been a resident of vacant homes, working to show that communities can control housing in a far better and beneficial fashion than the big banks have. Mm-hmm. And so, what I would like to see done would be something along the lines of what's happening in Richmond, California, regarding the use of the city's right to eminent domain. So if the banks don't want to use these properties,
arena. Yes.
Absolutely. If the banks don't want to put these properties to use, then I think that the city should go ahead and do so.
Let's talk a little bit more about. Let's get a little reaction on the panel from what you've just said, because eminent domain has been used for good and ill, needless to say. So this sounds like it might be a good idea to use eminent domain in favor of acquiring properties like this. What do you think, guys? Ed, do you want to start us out?
Oh, sure. It's a very creative use of eminent domain.
Ed gets.
And I know that the banking industry is furious over the idea, as one might imagine.
They don't mind having new developments for economic and wiping out housing for that purpose.
I think that a lot of people are looking at Richmond as an example and looking at it very closely to see what will happen there, because it does seem like a very promising way for the city to become very proactive in getting units off the block, as it were. I will echo what Andy said, which is that the history of the use of eminent domain has been mixed across the country, and the potential for the misuse of eminent domain is something we should all be worried about.
Yes, especially compensatory eminent domain. That is taking over properties and compensating people for it.
Antoine, can you speak to how many properties have they taken over at this point? Do you know if this is happening on a very large scale in Richmond, or have they just tried it out with a couple of different instances? Or
I know that they've attempted to pass policy with their city council. They've also been sued by a consortium of national banks to stop.
Oh, of course. I mean,
so
why not?
they are actually using it actively.
But they're actually using it, and is it working so far despite the lawsuits?
I am not
Have they
aware.
taken over properties?
So the short answer.
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Did you have something to add,
Newby.
Anthony?
So I think it has not been leveraged in the way that I think we're describing it today, to take over hundreds and hundreds of properties and rewrite the mortgage, or in Richmond, California, for example, it's a very specific conversation about principal reduction and how to rewrite loans to keep people in their house. That's an ongoing discussion. I know that lots of folks here are interested. There's also the vacant conversation about how to reclaim vacant properties.
Yes, yes.
And that actually has worked in places around the country.
Maybe
So I think
work them into the community land trust system or something like that.
that's right. And
Oh,
so,
can you do that? Oh, good.
So in the way that Antoine was describing community control, and I think there's lots of folks, including us at NOC, who believe that folks in the community often have a much better way to manage properties and manage their own communities than multinational conglomerates who often don't have a vested interest in neighborhoods and communities. So I think it's a fantastic sort of tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And I know lots of people are watching Richmond very closely. Folks in Minneapolis are watching Richmond very closely.
Is this Richmond, Virginia?
Richmond,
California.
Which was
Sorry.
it was one of the towns that was the most heavily hit by the foreclosure crisis. Had a large people of color population.
Of course. Oh, really?
And lots of overlap, as we all know.
Well, and we see that a lot, because even here in the Twin Cities, there are areas that are very concentrated, more affected by this foreclosure crisis than others, and so we have to then respond to those areas, obviously, a little bit.
Now, Jamie Kelly ran for mayor, so there's a little bit of policy stuff involved in running for mayor. Is this one of the, was this one of your platform, or planks in your platform?
I actually just ran under the political principle to stop foreclosures now. Actually, before I ran it by my candidate of choice, who was Betsy Hodges, who had supported me from the beginning.
Oh, good.
I didn't want to make it sound like I was trying to compete with her or something.
But she just edged you out.
She said she thought it was a brilliant idea for me to draw attention to the situation that I was in.
Well, that's good. I mean, in a way.
What I would like to mention something about eminent domain, though.
Would you please?
It does not apply to Freddie Mac situations like mine. So apparently, quasi-government agencies would be exempt from. Someone using eminent domain.
Is that right?
Yes.
What do we know about that, gents?
Well, it's sort of sicking the dog on itself, is it not?
We got a little bit of a gap in knowledge. Oh, boy.
Well, there's a lot. One of the things about this eminent domain, as Ed mentioned, is it's often used to build stadiums and to build railways and big public projects. And so that's how it's been applied, and there's a very sort of legal, narrow definition of how it can be used. This is a whole new sort of frontier for how this can be used, and I think that the legal wrangling of that conversation is happening in all parts of the country. I think it'll play out in different ways in different parts of the country.
We have Kat and then Tom. Well, yeah.
Kat Salonik from...
Hi. Yeah, my name is Kat Salonik, and I'm one of Jamie's neighbors, and I'm actually on the Central Neighborhood Association board. And there, you know, we work with homeowners all the time who are
Thank you.
experiencing the blight of these vacant homes and who are experiencing foreclosure. And our neighborhood is half Latino. It's a neighborhood of color, and much like North Minneapolis, it is one of the highly affected neighborhoods in our city. And I just want to say, Jamie, I think what you're doing is so brave and such an inspiration to homeowners, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, as they hear you standing up to this Goliath, this Freddie Mac. And I know that one of the ways you talked about in the video that you defend your home is getting the community out. And I just want to know, like, when you have an eviction, what is the best way that you can get people out there to alert them? And I know, Anthony, you've worked with Occupy Homes in these eviction alert situations. What is a way that you could help us out in getting us to help you out?
And we have just about 5 minutes left, so just to let you know.
Well, there's a quick way to get
Now,
involved.
excuse me, but even after that 5 minutes, we'll be back to have questions and answers to continue like this for our webcast, which will follow. Okay, go ahead.
Jamie?
If you text at Occupy Homes to 23559, you will be on our text alert, so you will know if there is an eviction attempt. And I would appreciate as many people as possible to do that, because it's very important at this situation. The police could come at any time, and it would be very nice to have my neighbors and community there to support me and to support all of us who are trying to build our communities, not tear them apart with this foreclosure crisis.
Could you repeat that number again?
Yes, it is. You would text at Occupy Homes to 23559.
And if I could just echo the courage that it takes for Jamie. We've seen this over and over with individual homeowners like Rose McGee, and Vic can attest to this as well.
Yeah.
The courage of individual people to stand up in the face of, you know, some of the wealthiest organizations the world has ever
and
known.
the police and the sheriff and
with an arsenal of tools to carry out their whims is extraordinary, and it's also been effective. It's one of the only tools actually that's been effective as a defense against the sort of the corporate takeover. So much so that in going back to Keith Ellison, I have to say, in defense of Keith, he's reached out in numerous homeowner cases and done everything that a congressman can possibly do, leveraging all of the resources within his office, and has been told by these banks to go kick rocks.
Oh, go kick rocks.
Right?
Well, all right, and that's enough.
And so if a congressperson is being told that by these banks, that actually we don't have to listen to you and we're not going to be accountable to you, what does the average person have in their tool belt to sort of fight back? So it both speaks to the overwhelming sort of mountain of obstacles that an average person has, and the fact that these individual families can fight back and win.
Thank you, Anthony.
We'll come back to you.
Unfortunately, we must end our first hour broadcast here, so we'll sign off and we'll take a quick break and head into the additional question and answer time that will be posted online, so you can view that on the web. Thank you to all of our panelists today, Vic Rosenthal,
The Executive Director of Jewish Community Action, and Jamie Kelly, South Minneapolis resident, recent mayoral candidate. Good best of your luck with your fight, Jamie.
And yes, definitely. Best of luck to you. We also have Anthony Newby, Executive Director of Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, Ed Getz, Director of the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs Housing Forum at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. That's a mouthful. Thank you all. Truth to Tell Community Connections is a co-production of Civic Media Minnesota, St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and KFAI Fresh Air Radio. Links to audio and video archives of this and all of our past shows are available on TruthToTell.org.
Thanks to Dave Zirat and the SPNN crew for their great work capturing this on video and this evening. And thanks to Peter Hansen, Kel Heil, Mark Kerner, and Siobhan Kierans for their production assistance as well.
Join us next month for another edition of Truth to Tell Community Connections. Until then, I'm Michelle Ali Murati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. And we'll see you next time. Until then, please do take care of each other.